Welcome to episode 94, Down the Rabbit Hole. How are you, Carl?
I'm good. I think maybe we're seeing a bit of summer weather, don't you think?
Yeah, it starts to get better for sure outside. Today we have a very interesting episode.
Yeah.
And it's called Generations Fear.
That's right. We thought it's 2024. We thought let's look back at, we have this habit of naming generations.
Mm-hmm.
And the earliest one is the greatest generation, it's referred to.
Yeah.
And they are people born before 1924.
Yes.
So we thought, let's have a look.
Why not?
At a certain aspect of generations. And what we thought we'd have a look at was, for each generation, what were their greatest fears or anxieties?
Yes, because in the end, every generation changes. Their mindset changes, their conditions and environmental conditions changes.
This is certainly what we'd expect.
Yeah.
And I think there were some surprises in this kind of investigation. Not really an investigation, but so why don't we just kind of whiz through the generations and we can just spend a few seconds on each one.
Yeah.
And then we'll come to what I think is quite an interesting conclusion.
Yeah. Well, why don't you start with the first two generations? Is that
because I'm the oldest here? Or? I think it is. It's ageism. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So let's start with the greatest generation.
Yeah.
That is the group of people who were born prior to 1924. So, they're mostly dead.
Kind of.
So no complaints from this group, right? And what did they have to deal with? Well, they had World War I, which is pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
Then they had the Great Depression, which began in about 1929 and ran for a number of years and caused major disruptions globally.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, following that, not to be outdone, we had World War II.
Yes,
and
that generation really
they
banged a lot with wars.
Whoa.
And serious wars.
Full on.
Yeah.
Not your regional skirmishes that we have today, but full on stuff.
Yes.
And their kind of anxieties were really based around economic concerns, economic despair, and just general uncertainty about the future, I think.
Which is so understandable. After you lived 2 world wars, I guess lives of everybody became so uncertain, or you had doubts about what's going to happen with you, right?
Yeah, and of course, this came just. Of course, they also experienced the pandemic, the 1918 pandemic.
Yeah.
The flu pandemic, which killed 50 million people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had that as well. We shouldn't forget.
All this reflects easily in uncertainty, and all these things, especially war, created the Great Depression.
Huge.
So
that is the greater generation. Not too many of those left, but maybe we could go on to the silent generation. Would you just cover that?
Okay. The silent generation is for persons that were born between 1925 and 1945. So obviously one of the biggest fears here was World War II.
Yeah. And
basically they were all on World War II.
Yeah.
Younger people were being sent to fight.
Yeah, they're being called up, right?
Yes, just called up. Like everybody, you are on age, you go to war.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest fear of that generation. But there were also some, in a way, positive outcomes out of it.
Right.
Which would be, they learned a lot of resourcefulness because during times of war, and especially that kind of war, and economic crisis happening and all, they had to try to survive somehow.
Figure out how to make do with what they had.
With what you have, exactly. Be efficient with what you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I think the biggest fear here is exactly war itself, uncertainty again. And this is interesting because this is the generation that saw actually the growth and the surge, the beginnings of rock.
Yeah, for sure.
Of the big films, of
big filmmakers,
golden, kind of era.
Yeah, but Because, of course, obviously during the war there were, shall we say, propaganda movies.
Totally.
But, of course, after the war there was a lot of retrospective movies looking back
and trying to see
trying to figure
what
it
did
out.
we actually just live through.
Yeah, what happened, right?
Yeah.
So many of the, if you look at, greatest movies ever type lists, there's quite a lot of movies from that post-war period that were regarded as pretty significant, right?
Yeah.
So I, very conveniently...
See, that was the trick.
Yeah, very good. I will conveniently do the baby boomers, or boomers, as younger generations like to insult us with. And quite right.
Do you think it's actually an insult if somebody calls you boomer?
Yeah, because...
Or it has to do with the way they say it?
It's the way they say it. They say, I think the insult phrase is, hey, boomer, right? And it's like, I'm meant to get upset by that. I'm just happy that you can see me, But of course, the boomers were born between 46 and 64. I was kind of smack in the middle of that. Our biggest worries were the Cold War, certainly for the older part of the boomer generation. I certainly do remember the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Nuclear threats, no?
Although, that was nearest we actually came to another nuclear war.
I think that is part of what the previous generation realized with all those movies about what we actually just lived through World War II and the ending of it with a nuclear blast in Japan.
Exactly.
And all the horror and all the things that happened afterwards.
Yeah.
That fear is totally translated into the new generation of boomers.
It was very live as a concern, right? Because,
it happened not long ago.
Exactly.
Because it was really recent. If you think about time, basically it was like,
it was 45,
it just happened in that time.
46, wasn't it? 45, 46. So, again, the things we were worried about at the time were recessions, technological advancements. I know you may think it's amusing looking back. What were the technological innovations, but it was really more technology penetrating further down into society. So, obviously, if you think about telephones, obviously telephones have been around since the early 20s, but of course only rich people could afford them.
Yeah.
But by the time we get to the 60s, they're pushing down into, down the pyramid into society. You've got television becoming more commonplace, whereas prior to that it was radio. There were many early computerization, blah, blah, blah.
I think by that time, early computerization, it was still, it was happening, but it was still this big stuff.
There were big movements, big things were happening, and certainly society was changing to do with people's attitudes about things. I think societies were becoming more secular, less religious, certainly the one I lived in anyway. So that brings us to
Generation
conveniently.
X. Yes, conveniently Generation X, which is where I fit in. Exactly in between those two years, because, basically it's considered Generation X to be born between mid-60s and early 1980s.
Yeah.
So, me being from 70s, I'm in between. And when I was reading the notes we had for this, I tried to identify myself if it relates to me somehow. And one of the first points that we were checking during the research was grew up during economic recessions, which it was happening, yes, for sure. We had technological advancements, which I think were some of the biggest or fastest increases in technology.
Certainly towards the end with computers.
Yes, for sure, yes. And a lot of cultural shifts. There were a lot of cultural movements, student movements that affected the mindset of people in that generation, exactly. So what were the most common fears? And I was telling Carl that I remember Job instability, I think it's one that when I was younger, you could feel affected by that. Everybody was trying to find always
steady work.
A steady work. Some people were going through entrepreneurship, but it was the less. Mostly everybody was wanting to find a secure job that you can just live and thrive on. Environmental degradation, for sure, it became a topic of, in a way, fear, because we live through the ozone hole in the atmosphere, and that really...
That was my generation's fault, by the way. But then everything's my generation's fault.
And one of the last ones was the impact of divorce on families.
Yeah.
It became, at least for my perception, maybe you can let us know in your comments.
Maybe people should understand you are Mexican, and so you're talking about your experience within that
during that cultural society, and it became a bit more common to see families divorced, and more people being more open to talk about their parents or single parenting, and also the impact that some kids that maybe with more traditional views or families would say about, or fearing of having maybe a parents that will divorce.
Right.
What's going to happen, the uncertainty of that in those times. And because it was not really like a common thing to be before that. I don't know if for generation it was. I don't think it was.
And it was still frowned upon by the main religious groups as being, a product of, shall we say, sin or whatever, fallen women and all this nonsense. So, a period of huge change, probably through my generation, through yours, and I'll do the next one.
Yes.
So we move on to that lovely group, the millennials.
Yes.
They were born between the 80s, that is the 1980s, and the 1990s. Again, they faced further technological change. Also, this was the big period for globalization where... And I'm not a believer in conspiracy theories, although we like to talk about them.
Yes.
But that was definitely the period where there was a huge drive by persons or groups unknown to move jobs to the lowest cost base. So this was the period where there was huge disruption to society because what were traditional industries ended up dying because they were now done halfway around the world.
Outsourcing.
Offshoring, blah, blah, blah. But of course, very few governments made allowances for the unemployment that this was causing, and that if we take my country, for example, we had mining, steel manufacturing, all these kinds of traditional industries that just disappeared. And the problem was, if you were a bean counter, an accountant, then all you see is numbers on a spreadsheet. But what was actually happening was entire towns and cities were being hollowed out because the industries they depended on were just disappearing. And I'm sure it was the same
everywhere, almost
everywhere, right? So millennials, again, they were seeking kind of meaningful careers, but at the same time, the beginnings of wanting more flexibility with their work because they started to become more sensitive about work-life balance type stuff. I mean, my generation and probably yours, we never really heard of that, right? That was something that came later, not for us. So over to you for the next one.
Yes. And we're talking now about Gen Z.
Yeah.
Conveniently, I do have a teenager there. So Gen Z was born from the mid-1990s to early 2010s.
Right.
So, and I was checking also here the points, and they kind of fit exactly in how my teenager sometimes behaves and voices. I think one of the main fears that we found also during the research was around not achieving their hopes and dreams.
Mm.
So that pressure of whatever you are having hopes or dreams to do,
Yeah.
not achieving it is perceived as a big fall.
Kind of in front of you, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And they worry a lot about financial stability, especially having enough money to survive or to live, basically,
Right.
in a comfortable way.
And of course, again, we're now in this period, again, something that just did not exist for either my generation or yours, which is this, this thing with 0-hour contracts and the gig economy and the fact that, for example, it's been the case certainly through beginning millennials and through Gen Z and whatever, that in most advanced economies, it really wasn't possible to think about house ownership unless both partners were working full-time.
Yes.
And the cost of childcare and right?
And then you would have to ask for loans, things to be able to cover that.
Yeah, all these things. Anyway, so that's that generation. So
Gen Z, which, by the way, was a generation born already with internet existing.
Exactly. They are the generation where at least the World Wide Web was there from their first awareness, right?
Yeah.
But then we come to the youngest generation.
Yes.
Because of the way humans think, of course, we started the generation alphabet at the end.
At the end.
So now we've been forced to go back to the beginning.
Which is alpha.
Yeah, generation alpha. So, born from the early 2010s.
Until now.
So a 21st century generation. They're still going, apparently.
Yes. Well, let's say that it's from 2010s onward, right?
Yeah.
So today, which is May 2024.
Good reminder.
They are 14 years old, let's say, or less.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, it's interesting to start to see what are the fears of this generation.
Yeah.
Because they are still on a young age. So probably the perception of their fears is based on how, as literally children, they are still seeing things, right?
Where are they getting the information from to form these?
Which is what we were going to go now.
Exactly.
This is the generation of social media, full-on social media, full-on internet, full-on technology all the time.
Full-on silo thinking and algorithmic news and algorithmic opinion reinforcement and so on and so forth.
Of influencers shaping the way they think, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think that because of they've grown up from the get-go with these factors, they're in some ways, I don't want to say more advanced, but I think they've been forced to think about things that we didn't think about at this age. They have somehow, and not somehow, but they are being faced with these, shall we say, more existential questions. And we never had to think about these things, right?
Yeah, no.
At this age, at 14, but they do.
For example, with my daughter, there was a point when she was asking, how was life without actually internet or mobile phones?
Yeah.
It became a norm, a normal thing.
Yeah, before.
I think now a generation alpha has no way to actually
What was it like before social media?
Before social media, before having internet, before having devices connected all the time to internet.
Yeah. And at the same time, Generation Alpha probably is the true first generation that probably can't understand, for example, broadcast television.
Yeah.
And sitting down to watch the next episode of something
every week
at a certain time,
which somehow is returning in a way. Even on streaming services, there are certain series being released week by week.
It's a bit like vinyl coming back. It is, right? Is it almost kind of a nostalgic view of the past? I don't know. And it's being kind of represented for a new generation. I don't know. Anyway, so that was a very quick run through.
Yes.
Because, we know you've got a lot of demands on your time. We didn't want to dwell on it too much. But we decided that we would look at one further thing. And that is really interesting, isn't it? We decided to look at one further thing, which was, what is it? Well done. Yeah, we had a slight glitch there.
Yes, this alien device was...
Yeah, this...
You know,
Anyway, we decided that having gone through it in more detail than we've presented here, we've kind of skimmed it here, we thought that we were kind of seeing some kind of stuff cropping up more than once. So we decided to do an analysis and try and identify and look for evidence of kind of common threads that kind of permeate through all the generations, right? And it through some analysis we kind of arrived at there appear to be three common things that pervade every generation. And the first one is feelings of anxiety. Every generation appears to be anxious.
But I believe that anxiety is a trait of the species.
It's
basically,
part of what we are, right?
Yeah.
And it may, I'm sure that prior to these named generations, going right back to Lucy living in the cage with the other in the cave with the other guys, they were anxious about
the unknown of being hunted by animals, by predators.
Where are we going to get the next saber-toothed tiger from?
Exactly.
And why does the sky go dark at night, and why don't we invent religion?
And you still have that anxiety there, right?
You can imagine.
Yeah.
Maybe there are even more reasons to be anxious, right? And then the next one was, again, a commonality. Every generation was technology, the effects of technology and social change.
Yeah.
Because although we're only looking at 100 years here, every generation has gone through what appear to be very significant technological changes.
It was a
and
big
social
technological
changes.
change.
Yeah.
I think the problem is that people become so used to routine.
Well, people like stability.
They like that stability because of their anxiety, that when there's any change, it comes again the unknown.
It fuels the anxiety.
Then comes back the anxiety. And that's why probably is one of those problems and fears that are common across all generations.
And it's probably never going to go away, is it?
Exactly.
And the third thread that we saw repeated across the generations was basically about the human condition and adaptability. Yeah. And if you can kind of summarize the whole thing, if you wanted to summarize all these generations, what you could say is there is a generalized fear of the unknown. And it is just simply inherent in being human.
Yes.
There's no way around it. Yeah. And in fact, it's kind of, I think, a pro-survival trait, because it is better to be anxious about a situation, i.e. what is in the shadows, than it is to go, I'm sure what is in the shadows is perfectly fine, and why don't we invite it in? I think
you lose that sense of being cautious on what you do.
Exactly. I think it's a pro-survival
trait. You lose
trait.
the fear.
Yeah, you've got to have an element of fear and anxiety. It's pro-survival.
Which takes actually to our summary of this, which is fear of the unknown is an inherent to the human condition.
Yeah.
Humans adapt, and resilience is a shared trait.
Yeah.
Which is true. And it's true that we're here because of that. And although we are always fear of changes, we always have to adapt.
Yeah.
If we don't adapt, we disappear as a species.
Adapt
basically.
or die, right?
Yeah.
This is a common enough phrase. And resilience is your ability to bend with the changing, with the changes.
Yes.
And somehow it becomes your new normal, right? And just like to finish with my personal belief that every generation, as bizarre as we might think it is going to be, every generation is born into their normal.
Of course.
And
that's
true. How they cope.
Yes. Exactly.
Adaptation and resilience. Anyway,
Yes. So this is our topic of today, generation fear. What do you think? What are your fears? Which generation were you? Let us know in the comments. What were you, if you agree with the fears that we found and we got, if you want to add any other fears to each generation, and how do you perceive actually that from this point on, generations' fears would be?
Yeah, what would they be?
That would be interesting to know.
It would
your
indeed.
opinion, yes. Well, before we go, don't forget the usual stuff. Like, subscribe. If you are on audio,
come onto the video on YouTube. Just search for Rabbit Hole Origins.
yes. My name is Rafael Ruiz.
I'm Carl Baldwin.
See you next time.